G'day everybody and good morning. I've got my cup of tea. Hang on for a second.
Or good evening. Could be good evening if you're in the
Good
States.
evening, yes. So today we thought we'd talk about screen memory technology, and we've got a few guests that we'll be bringing on as well
Yep,
to talk about it.
yep. And we're just going to do the thing where we say, we can see you saying hello.
Yes.
We're not as good as Lynn at clicking on those things. So hello to everybody that is already saying hello to us this morning. And thank you for being here. Okay. So what are we going to say about that? Neil and Thomas are going to come on with us in just a minute. Their full bio information is in the show information if you click on the show more button on YouTube. And so you can read all of that in a second. So I'm going to try and make the technology work and click on the right button. And hopefully they're here.
There's Neil and there's Thomas.
Yep, don't forget to unmute, guys. Don't forget to unmute.
I think I'm unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, guys.
We can hear you.
Yeah, all good.
Okay.
All right, so the way we're going to start is I'm just going to talk basically about screen memories, and then I'll get you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with the chats. How about that? All right?
That sounds good.
So most people that have interacted with extraterrestrials have been subjected to some sort of consciousness tampering, and this is screen memory. We've got a couple of categories that we work with, and we use those categories because it's much easier to understand how they are layered and how they overlap with each other as well. So I'll give you an example. If a person has missing time, so they're driving along and it's supposed to take 20 minutes to get to work, but it takes 3 hours or something, that's classed as a class A screen memory, all right? And they're basically immovable at some point. They just don't come down generally. Class B screen memories are the narrative. So a person could be on craft, they could be holding a child, they could be flying a craft. But what's actually happening is that their human consciousness is being told this narrative, but something else is happening to them. Class C is the screen memory that takes place where you've had contact and you don't remember, but 20 years later or 10 years later, suddenly it drops and you just remember everything. They're the time-released screen memories. Class D are to do with hybrid constructs, and they're quite difficult to understand, so I'm just going to skip past them. And category E is to do with when you initially are about to have contact or be taken, you will see an owl, a clown, a deer, or something, and they're different overlays. They're narratives that a human is given to shield them from seeing the extraterrestrials.
I like to call those ones partial overlays.
Partial overlays.
Yeah, it's weird because you're aware of what the event that's happening, but you get like the actual ET being is an owl or a deer or something random.
All right.
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say before we go any further that the information that we have about screen memories really does come from our own contact with the Zetas that we work with. And so the information that Paul's just given there about those different categories really is mainly applicable to the Zeta beings. Other races do use screen memories, and through talking to lots of people as we help a lot of experiences to work through their contact, you know, we know that other races are definitely using screen memories, and we're kind of getting a feel for what the other races are doing. A lot of the other races will try and mimic the processes that the Zetas, and when I use the word Zetas, I mean the overall grey races, and I'm excluding the abductors in that. But you know, so they'll mimic those processes. But I just wanted to say to people watching, that's where our information generally comes from. The Zetas, the greys, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
All right, so Neil, would you like to give us a description about your life story? Thank you.
Like I said, we'll keep it brief. I'm 52 years old. I live in Akron, Ohio. I do marketing by day. I've been an artist and musician, creative type all my life. Had contact since the early age of about 2 or 3 was my first experience with craft, and then it's been ongoing. It started in my 20s, 1920. I started having pretty regular contact with encounters with craft and orbs, and been a contact experiencer since then. And I've recently wrote a chapter for the CCRI group out in Ray Hernandez's group out in Berkeley, California, and have been trying to reach out to other experiencers over the last couple of years since I came out about talking about my experiences.
Great.
Awesome.
And Thomas.
So it's interesting. I would say that I have had since I was very small, I've had a cluster of experiences later in my life identified as intensely involved with ufology and missing time episodes, but a little bit more hybrid early in my life. As early as 2 or 3 years old, I had a being that appeared out of the wall. He would come and visit me in front of me at night. I recall that clearly. And then later I became interested in ufology just before I had a very profound missing time episode in my home. I awakened and there was craft outside my window. And then later I got into being a TV meteorologist at the ripe old age of 21, and I worked for a number of affiliates in the United States. And it seemed as if, as I think about it, that the missing time episodes and craft encounters that I had, as I recall through screen memories, occurred when I was going through transitions between these TV stations. They seemed to happen at key pivotal times where the direction that I thought I was going to be going got rearranged in another direction. So at least that's my interpretation of it. It was almost like an intervention or something, maybe at a crisis point. So I view the experiences as being pretty constructive and part of my own personal growth, and it's almost like my interpretation is what somebody would say a higher power, or not religious, but really a very personal, personal redirection and direct engagement in my own evolving personhood.
Okay. Yeah, Marios, is it? Marios has said maybe they manipulate our brains and we can see animals like owls.
I was going to say, let's start with the partial overlays. Lots of owls already.
Lots of owls. But the thing is, Neil, do you want to talk about those experiences that you've had?
I've got a lot of owl stuff going on.
Hands up who's had owls.
Yeah. The first major experience that I had at age 19 started with me and 2 people who witnessed this owl. And this owl, it was like it wanted to get our attention. It hooted and flew across our view where we were facing at this lake. And we were camping outside of Tampa in Florida. And went into this whole experience. The owl flew across our vision and landed in a tree to our right and was observing us. And it was a huge horned owl. For me, it tends to be great horned owls. It looked like it was probably about 3.5 feet tall. It was that big of an owl from feet to the top of its head. And it just perched up in the tree and was observing us. And what had made me notice the first craft was when I watched the owl fly by, I noticed this star that was up in the sky that was blinking colors. And that's what drew my attention to the craft. And then this whole experience unraveled with me and these 2 people camping out in the woods.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. So I was walking home with a friend. It was quite late at night when I was, 14, 15. It was like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., very quiet, little sleepy town in Hampshire in the UK. And we'd stopped to look over we were going up a hill, and we stopped to look at the view over the city. And this oversized barn owl, it was barn owls for me, white underneath, oversized, flew over really low. So it seemed about, I don't know, 10 meters above our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And it was huge. And we both, all I remember is just both standing there watching this owl fly, no motion. It was like it was gliding in, and it just carried on going. And I remember we both stopped and sort of went, what just happened? We were both utterly disorientated and confused. Got home, I don't know what time it was. Definitely missing about an hour there. It was very odd.
Right. So, Thomas.
Yeah, I actually had an owl experience. I was visiting with a relative who was a primary care physician, and I was explaining to him the nature of several seamless missing time episodes that I had and the narrative around it. And as we were talking, a gigantic owl flew over his house and landed on the tree line. It was huge. It must have been 3.5 to 4 feet tall. And I said, he saw it. I said, look at that owl. He said, we don't have any owls around here. And it was huge. And that was not lost on me. I thought, interesting. Was that, somebody monitoring us, or was that confirmation, or was it both?
Yeah.
So what's going on with this? Why are they showing us owls, be they hawks?
If it is an owl, then it's an owl, and a bird is a bird is a bird. But if it's not that, then it's a construct, and the constructs are put in place because they're attention grabbing for a first, like you are looking at it.
Yeah.
The second thing is that you're not in any real fear because you're seeing the owl, but behind what's going on there is you then moving into an altered state and possibly being brought onto craft. Now, at that point in time, could be an A-class screen memory, because then you've got missing time. It can be for 5 minutes maximum. But for them, you could have been on board for an hour. But for your physical time reference, it's only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's other animals as well. It's not just owls. Neil, you've got to tell the deer story.
Well, I have to tell this other owl experience, because I'm still trying to pinpoint. Well, I have multiple owl experiences. I had an owl a year ago that I had contact with out in the woods, and this was an interesting experience. I'd gone back to a place where I had this experience back in 2012. I used to live in an apartment complex with my young son at that time, and there was a wilderness area that was back behind my apartment building, and I would go back there, and I would spend a lot of time by myself during the day, and go out there and meditate and hang out in the woods. Well, I had this experience in the middle of the day, probably at 11 in the morning, with a huge giant barn owl that appeared. I was in the woods walking, and it appeared out of nowhere with a giant black raven following it in tandem. They were right next to each other, and they're natural enemies. They don't normally are seen together. This owl flew right over the top of my head. Its feathers practically touched the top of my head, and I ran after it for probably about 5 to 8 minutes in the woods. I followed them, and they were just flying about 6 feet off of the ground next to each other in front of me. As they flew through the woods, I was running behind them. And then I went back to that area a year ago, and before I walk into the woods, I kind of said a prayer to the spirit to offer up permission to go into the woods, and that I was coming there with respect. And out of nowhere, I hear a great horned owl hoot out to me. So it calls out to me, and I called back to it. I went into the woods, and I never wear a watch, so I don't know if I had missing time during this event or not. But I went into the woods and I found a spot that had somebody had drug an old couch out into the middle of the woods. So I sat down on the couch, and it was starting to the sun was starting to go down. It was starting to be dusk, and out of nowhere, that owl flies over to a tree, literally 20 feet, 25 feet away from me, and perches in the tree, and was there for a good length of time. I remember sitting there for at least a half an hour. Might have been longer, because then all of a sudden, I don't remember anything after. I don't remember the owl flying off. I remember sitting there, the owl was observing me, it was up in the tree, and then the next thing I remember was there was an object in the sky that was just a bright light. There was no strobes off of it like an airplane or anything like that. There was no noise. And it was just heading slowly off in the sky when I was just like, okay, I guess I should get out of here. It's getting dark. And the owl was gone. So I don't know if that was...
Do you remember it being on board on craft?
Nope.
Do you have any?
Not at all. Nothing. Yeah. I just remember sitting there hanging out. I remember communicating with the bird. When the bird came over to the tree, and I was kind of laughing. I was just like, I know you're not an owl, and it was just watching me. And I've had dream experiences with owls where I woke up with marks. I had this dream where I encountered, was encountering two great horned owls that were climbing on me. I was sitting in a park, like setting with trees, and literally the interesting thing about the one that happened in the woods a year ago was the following day. I swear to God, it was the same owl. Came to my apartment. I had gotten locked out of my apartment, and I had this totally crazy experience where I was waiting in my hallway to get into my apartment, waiting for the landlord to come over. And somebody had let me into the hallway, so I was sitting up on the stoop. I lived on the third floor. I had left my window open, like halfway, completely open. And this was in the winter. And it was the very next day after going back from the woods. I hear something in my apartment when I'm sitting on the hallway, and it was really weird. It sounded like somebody coming up and down the steps, like a small person, like a child. Because I had a song. It reminded me of like the size of a toddler. It sounded like somebody on the other side of the door, and I felt like this psychic connection at that point. And I was just like, I can hear you. In my mind, I said this. I said, I can hear you. I know you're the owl, and you're in my apartment. And I heard footsteps patter up the steps into my apartment. And I was just like, am I losing my mind? What's going on? Yeah. I started to freak out, and I was like, I'm going outside to smoke a cigarette. So I went down to my porch, and immediately when I stepped onto my porch, something said, look up. And I looked up when I stepped off the porch, and the owl leapt off of the roof, was up on my windowsill. Leapt off of the roof and flew right over my head, landed in the tree across the street, and turned around and was looking at me and hooted at me 3 times.
3 times. That's interesting.
3 times.
Now, Thomas, you've had missing time events as well.
I have. The one that involved animals was one that occurred in the Berkshires of Massachusetts in the United States. I had retrieved a van that I drove from Indiana to Maine, and passing through Western Massachusetts at about midnight, I remember getting gasoline in Amsterdam, New York. I got to Williamstown, Massachusetts at 1:05 a.m. And something had me look to the right, and I saw what was a peach-colored light over the Berkshire Mountains in Western Massachusetts. And I looked at it, I thought, well, it's probably a TV antenna. I said, no, it's a peach-colored light. And I just matter-of-factly said to myself, oh, it's probably a UFO, just like that. And so I was in, from that point going forward, what I would describe as what seemed like a hypnagogic state, where I was aware that it seemed like it was taking forever to get to Route 2, which was the main highway between that point in southern New Hampshire where I was to be at my dad's house. He was still alive at that point. And so something then had me look at my watch, and it was suddenly 4:15. And I knew exactly where I was before, and I was in the same spot. I was in a short sleeve shirt, blue. It was also 45 degrees outside, and 3 hours had passed, and I wasn't cold.
Wow.
So I had other missing time episodes. Now, at that point, when it was 4:15, I looked ahead of me, and there were deer on the side of the road. And then there weren't deer. They were there,
Okay.
and they were looking at me, and I got a sense of comfort from them. And it's like, all's well. And then they were gone.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And also, you know, in regards to deer, I'm sure that Neil's got a really good tale about deer as well. Yeah.
Yeah, this was from 2019. I was living out in Kent, Ohio, and I wasn't having a whole lot of activity during that time, but I'd gone out to get something to eat, and I was driving back from picking up some drive-through, and when I got out to, the stars were just coming out, and when I got to the place where I was going into the house, I was looking at the stars, and I usually do a meditation if I'm out there and observing on a clear night, and a lot of times I'll get activity. Well, I've told you about this encounters that I've had with this racquetball-sized blue orb that appears to me. So I had gotten out of the car, and I was looking at the sky, and reached out mentally to them, and then out of nowhere, probably about 20 feet in front of me, the orb appears and flew for about 3 or 4 feet, and then flashed and disappeared. Well, I just giggled and laughed and was just like, thank you, you know, and went inside. Didn't think anything of it, went to bed. I had laid in bed before I fell asleep looking at the phone on the internet, and then fell asleep, woke up sometime later with complete sleep paralysis. I was laying in bed. I could not move anything except my eyes. I was fully conscious, fully aware in like a heightened hyper sense. I felt a presence in the room immediately. I've had this happen to me several times over the course of my life. But this whole experience was just super odd because it started with the orb, and then I went to bed, and I wake up and I'm in full paralysis. I broke free of that by wiggling my pinky. I wiggled my left pinky to the point where I was able to break it, and I hopped up. And then I felt the presence leave the room as I hopped up, and I ran to the window, and I looked out the window, and it was pitch black out, and I immediately just looked down to the road. I was in the second story of this building. I looked down to the road, and there were 3 female deer just looking up in perfect sync with me. They both, like when I looked down, all 3 of them looked up at me in perfect sync and were staring at me. And I was just like, okay, this is really weird. You know, it's like 3 in the morning and these deer are just walking up a residential street. I wasn't in a real wooded area or anything like that. This was like a pretty populated area. And they looked at me, and then they all 3 looked away at the same time, and then trotted off back down the street, and I went back to bed.
Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting because from the Zeta perspective, you know, if you're going to interact with humans or not be seen by humans, then you're going to need either 2 things. You're going to either need the ability to be able to shield what you look like in consciousness, or you're going to need some level of technology that's basically on craft that's going to amplify the ability of the beings to present themselves in a way that they seem to be something that they're not.
And that's for our benefit. They really do try not to freak us out. So, you know, we hear of the stories of the younger memories. So I've seen 6-foot rabbits in my lounge when there shouldn't be 6-foot rabbits. You hear of people talking about clowns and then developing this terrible phobia of clowns. So I think they really do try to spare us distress.
That's like the time Pan materialized in the house.
You've got to explain
Oh, okay.
what that's about. 'cause
So
that makes
we
perfect
had,
sense.
there was, I had my back to the wall. That's, I was standing sort of 5 meters from the door, but I had my back to the door, and there was 4 people in front of me, and they stopped talking to me and were looking around me, and I turned around and I saw this being crouching in the doorway, and we all know how high doors are, and it was Pan, legs and
Curly whirlies.
curly whirlies and all the rest of it. And we all just looked at this being, and it stayed there. It didn't disappear. And so I walked over to the being, and the being would have only been not even a meter from me. So, and still solid, like you could touch it, but I wasn't going to touch it. And I just said to her, look, you're not supposed to be here. Now, I was in some sort of altered state, because to be walking up to a being that's over 7 or 8 feet tall and just saying that when you're looking up at them, there should have been some level of fear at some point, but there was nothing. And the being instantly disappeared in front of everybody. So this being was there the whole time, like maybe a minute or 2 minutes, whatever, and everybody could see the being. They were solid. It was only years later, when we were talking to the Zetas, that we realised that there was actually an extraterrestrial, and the extraterrestrial had come into the house, and it scanned through one of the people's minds to see an image that we may accept, because they don't know the difference between what they perceive as a good or bad or indifferent image. And so when they materialised in the house that way, in full daylight, they thought that was an image that we would accept
Because of the children.
because of the children
had been reading Christian fables or something, or something to do with that. So they'd taken the image from the child's mind, thinking that would be, that wouldn't scare anybody, because of course it's in the child's mind, and they've misunderstood that perhaps that wasn't the right.
Well, yeah, we had to explain
image to go with
years later. But have you guys ever been given any healings or anything from beings?
Well, in relation to that, possibly, I can report that during my missing time episodes, I had been in an anxious state. Let's say, if I was destination driven, I could be tired, anxious, and so forth. And then, upon the realization that there was a seamless missing time episode, one of them involved a trip from Washington, D.C. to Savannah, Georgia. There were 3 hours that were missing, and it took me a while to figure out that was unusual. That was the first missing time episode that I had, but I was very, very calm. And that was the case with all of my missing time episodes. So the question I have is does that represent a healing of sorts, that there was an understanding that maybe I was under stress, that I was going in a particular direction in my life, and that was part of a redirection that was going on? Or was it event driven, in that they knew that I was driving and they didn't want me to be freaked out driving on the road because they realized there was implications for the other people around me? Or maybe it was a combination of both.
Interesting, because I've actually been driving along, and I had a Zeta turn up next to me in the vehicle, in the passenger seat, and was looking at the controls of the car, and said to me, do you mind if I learn to drive the vehicle? And I said, well, I would prefer that you didn't, because, they go, no, well, they sort of convinced me that it would be okay. And next thing I know, they've got hold of the steering wheel, and we're doing about 80 kilometers an hour on a freeway, and the car's slowly veering off, very slowly veering off the road towards a concrete pillar. And I'm saying to the being, you need to turn the steering wheel. And the being says to me, what's the steering wheel? I said, listen, you've got hold of the steering wheel. You need to, and now I'm starting to worry that it's suddenly going to go like this, right? And flip the vehicle over. And so I've sort of tried to push myself forward, my consciousness, and tried to take control of the vehicle. And it was really difficult to do it, but I managed to just even move a couple of mil and keep the vehicle on the road. After about I don't know, maybe a kilometre. I said, listen, we can't do this. I said, I don't mind teaching you if we're somewhere else where there's no other traffic. I said, but this is a bit dangerous, and you could be harmed, I could be harmed, whatever. And then the being just left. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how often that happens to people, but anyway.
The question I have is that what goes on with people that, what happened in the 3 to 4 hour missing time episodes that I have that I don't recall? There may have been an enormous amount of activity that occurred that my conscious self did not recall.
Well, there's the thing. You see, the thing is that in that 3 hour time, don't believe for a minute that you were on a stainless steel table in a craft for 3 hours, because you wouldn't have been. They're not that incompetent. So the thing is that, there could have been that while your time was missing, you were actually walking around, interacting with different beings. They were talking to you, but your consciousness is unable to hold the memories and the thoughts of that processes, because the difference between the time compression, the space-time compression is so different that when you're on craft, and I'll explain this a different way in a minute, when you're on craft, you're getting accelerated memories, and when you come back here, they're compressed. So quite often when the Zetas are talking to us, we'll be getting noises on audio. We then take the snap and we stretch it out, and it could be 10 or 20 different clicks. Now, that's because they're in a different frequency. With spirit people, we get the same thing. So when they put their speaking onto an audio, because they're on a higher frequency, it comes up as when we stretch it out, it's actually a full sentence spoken by them in English.
What about tones, Paul? I hear occasionally I'll hear warning tones or reassuring tones, like a hearing test tone. That's the best way to describe it.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're sorry, Neil, go on.
A high-pitched ringing in your ear.
Yep, but also intermediate.
I get them all the time.
An intermediate tone. It can be a high-pitched tone, or it can be an intermediate tone.
When I've had tones when I was younger, I was about 14. They were so loud I would drop down on the ground. I just couldn't stand up. I worked out that the tones are a method to determine your physical location. Imagine 1 billion people on a planet that are all hybrids, and they go that they're in their control area wherever they are, and they're going, oh, where's that being? And they just hit whatever technology they need, and it locates, like you would have mobile phone. They use the geolocation for phones. Where is that person? How high are they? What elevation? Those sorts of things. The tones uses a methodology to be able to use the auditory sensation or auditory process within the human to actually relay information back to them. And now it's all quiet.
And the dogs are
well, I'm going to bring up a point, since it was quiet, that I wanted to bring up. You had mentioned about we were talking about missing time, and you were mentioning about being in the automobile. I had lost half an hour at a time approximately when I was in college, and when I started having these experiences on a regular basis. And I was driving home from college to my hometown, and this was my second year of college, and I had driven that drive so many times that I could do it in my sleep. And I was just driving, it was the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday, and the next thing I know, I'm kind of like, I'm awake and fully conscious driving the car, but all of a sudden I'm not where I thought I was, and I'm 30 miles out of the way, sitting at a stoplight at a railroad crossing. And it was like all of a sudden like waking up, but I was already awake, from like a waking dream. And I'm sitting there at this stop sign, I'm looking around, I'm like, I have no idea where I'm at. I'm completely like in a place I've never seen before. And I had to pull the car over at the first gas station I stopped at. I ran inside and I grabbed a map off of the wall and started figuring out where I was at, and I was 30 miles out of the way on some road that I'd never ever been on before.
Yeah. Look, we've got some questions piling up in the side now, so we'll have a look at them. What do the Zetas look like? Well, the thing is with the Zetas, they look like the greys, but the problem is that they're different races of the greys, and there's 63 races of the species. They all look a bit different.
Yeah.
And
different heights,
different colours, different facial features, all these things. People have this typical grey image in their mind, but we've been lucky to have dealings with a couple of other races.
I think we've met five or maybe even six of the
and boy, once you actually start interacting with them, you can see the difference. It's really strange. I think initially you can't, and then once you've interacted with them, you can tell them completely. They look completely different.
Even within within one race of the 63, even within the one race, they're different colours depending on how old they are. So it's
Just a question: has anyone done any regression hypnosis? We haven't.
No, haven't.
I have.
You have.
I have. I will tell you that I've had some success with self-hypnosis with several experiences that were very pleasant. And it was mindfulness. It wasn't really intentional. But when I had a clinical psychologist and somebody else try to regress me, they couldn't get there because I was so defended against what had occurred that my conscious mind just would not allow me to go there. That's my case. Other people have been able to. I just have not been able to get there. But I will say that I wasn't intentional self-hypnosis, but in states of mindfulness at night, I've had several experiences that really had elements of what people report when they have a near-death experience and a UFO experience at the same time. There was a kind of a crossover where I was going from a forest into a river valley and witnessed the most beautiful UFO coming down this river valley. And the best way to describe it is that everything had consciousness. It was like this quantum state that was just incredible. And I remember consciously saying to myself, this has elements of both. It's not a dream because there was contrast of luminosity between craft and the surroundings that I don't get normally in dreams. So I'm going, this is an interesting state of consciousness. I think I'm going to remember this. And so I did. Mm-hmm. And I'm reporting it now. So.
Oh, there you go. The thing is there was a comment there that people don't trust the Zetas. I don't blame them. But then do I trust humans either? Boy, oh boy. You really need to work hard to build a relationship with a person. Yeah. And of course, if you're being taken or you're being abducted, a race may actually be transposing over the top of themselves an image that they know that would obfuscate your ability to be able to understand who's actually taking you. Yeah. So this is the thing. And so we as humans just go, oh, that's what's happening to me. But because of all of the layers of stuff that's going on in between us and what's going on, there could be a lot of other things going on as well. And this comes back to getting hypnotherapy or any type of therapy. You're really not sure if what is coming up through the screen memories are the truth or not, because it could be part of the programming that when you remember something, that it gets the narrative shifts a different way.
Right. Very tricky.
I was hypnotized as well. I did one session with a hypnotist and got regressed. We looked at 3 different experiences that I had out of my chunk of encounters, and one specifically that I was trying to get to was Tom had mentioned about trying to get to the bottom of the missing time events. I had my largest chunk of time happened with an encounter that occurred in 2016. And I lost an hour and 45 minutes of time during an encounter. The blue orb had shown up. I was outside of my house, and had an experience with the orb, and I had went back inside my house and came back out for another cigarette. The orb showed back up. I lost track of what was going on at that point. I went from sitting on my porch smoking a cigarette to coming to consciously on my neighbor's porch, looking over the roof at the ship flying off super quick. And I was super elated and like overjoyed and was waving goodbye at this ship. And then felt totally disoriented, went over into my apartment, was standing in the living room trying to figure out who I was, what was going on, looked at the clock, and had an hour and 45 minutes of missing time. My son, who has contact with me as well, was asleep during this whole time. We went to bed, and then I woke up in the morning, and we found a symbol that they had put on his hand of an upside down equilateral pyramid, or just like your triangle behind you on the wall. And it looked like a burn raised scar that was on his hand. It was there for 2 weeks. But I had lost an hour and 45 minutes of time, and that's one of the things we looked at with the hypnotic regression. I was able to remember everything that I'm consciously able to recall right now, but was not able to tap into anything with that hour and 45 minutes of time.
And this comes down to this. If you're a hybrid and you have a symbiotic relationship with two consciousness, one spirit, one extraterrestrial, and they're in relationship, right? When you're on craft, if they separate, this one's given the narrative, this is the spirit consciousness, this ET consciousness is interacting with their own race. There's no way. I just don't believe that it's possible that if this ET consciousness that's you doesn't want you to know what's going on, it's your consciousness. It doesn't matter who's delving into it, what qualifications they've got. They're not going to be able to force your higher self to reveal its information. It doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Someone said, do the Zetas have a sense of humor?
Yeah.
Not that I've seen.
No,
I do.
They're very interesting to talk to. You have to use very structured language. You can't use abbreviations, any acronyms. You couldn't use like New Age phrase like indigo children or star seeds. They've got no idea what you're talking about. You have to explain everything, the processes behind things for them to understand what you're talking about. It's not like talking to a human.
I'll give you an example of this is how the Zetas think, right? So if they're talking through me to Cyan, they'll tell her something.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later or 10 years later, somebody will ask the same question. Doesn't matter, not Cyan, somebody else will ask the same question. They'll say, we already answered that question.
And they've answered thousands of questions.
From their perspective, if they speak to one human, they've spoken to all humans.
Yeah. So if we have a group of people with us, which we do occasionally, to speak to them through Paul, and somebody asks something that they've already answered before, they won't answer it because, as far as they're concerned, they've got that information.
And that's why we have to record all of the conversations.
Yeah. We've Paul's
Thomas wants to ask.
Okay.
Just a couple of points. My wife and I both had a missing time episode simultaneously a few years ago. Interestingly, a day after I had spoken to Keek through Paul, we had a conversation, but we had a missing time episode. And the next morning, she came down and she said, look at this. She knew that she needed to look on the inside of her arm. And once again, she had the same markings that's in back of you, including those points on there, 6 millimeters. And then 2 weeks later, another one showed up on the inside of her leg as kind of like a confirmation or something.
That's when you need to document it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yes, a mutual friend has that picture. I may on my Mac, but in any event, I had an experience, interestingly enough, a few years ago where I was kind of drifting off to sleep, and she came up into the room, and I had been looking towards Antares, and I sensed that I was kind of communicating spontaneously. I started speaking to my wife. as an intermediary of some kind. But the best way to describe it, there was a me next to me that was interpreting what I was saying to her in Old English. So I was saying a language to her that I don't understand, but another me next to me was interpreting it in an Old English that was almost Old English, like thou, but very formal and very respectful of her and supportive and so forth. But I was looking towards Antares. I don't know if there's part of a Zeta civilization in that direction or not.
Oh, nobody would know that. Yeah. Nobody. Yeah. How do we know there's 63 races? Well, over the many, many years of working with them, we've just gleaned that information from them.
Yeah. We've got a couple of books that are free to download via the website.
Yeah.
And one of them was co-authored by a retired ex-government communication scientist, and he's studied a lot of what's been the information that's been passed through the Zetas. So, yeah. Claire says, was that a light? Yes, it was. That's just a car passing.
Yeah, not aliens.
Not aliens, not this time. I'm just scrolling through looking for questions, just in case I've missed anything.
My thing I want to say about all of this is we have a massive range of people. So we've got people that are being abducted and they're really not wanting this to happen. And then we've got the experiences on the other end, people that are out there doing CE5, people that are, lasers in the sky, whatever. And so all that gradient in between. And so, of course, there's going to be people that just don't want this, can't stand it, not interested. And then you've got a massive group of people on the other end that all want ET disclosure. So in the middle of it, somewhere, there's going to be some sort of middle ground at some point.
You got a lot through hypnosis, I think, what Shelley is talking about there. Yeah, I mean, the screen memories are very interesting. There are some that really won't shift. There are some that are designed to fail. It's like they put a plaster and they leave the edge just slightly riveled up. And when, I don't know, something must activate it. Maybe your awareness expands to a certain point, your frequency elevates. Maybe you've been meditating for 20 years, etc., and your own consciousness is expanding that little bit more. And it drops, that can always, that's happened to me a number of times, and it can be a bit of a shocker.
But the thing that still comes to my mind is it doesn't matter what you think you get.
Yeah.
You may, even if you tell yourself that that's what's happened, there's no way to know if it actually is what happened.
Yeah.
Because it's a narrative that you've been given. Mm-hmm. And, that's probably really unpopular. People don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
But when you work with them a lot and you get to understand the way that they are able to influence consciousness, it's very, very difficult to really understand what's going on. And this links into disclosure. When humanity discloses today, say, and then next week we're all outside looking at the sky waiting for the craft to come, how do we even know how to interact with these beings, and how do they know how to interact with us as well? So it's going to be a process where they need to develop some level of protocols to interact with humans. And I mean all races. Look at the Tall Whites.
Yeah.
And what was the name of that person? Charles
Hall. Yeah.
He spent a lot of time working with them, and he was in fear for most of it because he didn't know whether he was going to be harmed. I mean, he was trying to work out what protocol to use talking to them. They were just in their own space doing what they wanted to do. If you haven't heard of that story, you should look it up.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Very interesting, and it gives you an idea of what sort of discarnate consciousness or problems exist between two different species talking to each other and understanding the inflection of a voice, the action, like the indults in the supposedly, some people were injured or killed by a grey when they were being taught. I mean, there's a lot to this, and it's not just, this is what's happening. And I don't think any of us are able to say that we've got a full picture. That's really important. Guys, anything else that you'd like to say? Any really interesting stories, healings, encounters?
My son was healed by my contact and his contact. He was born with cyclic neutropenia, a white blood cell deficiency, and they came and took him when he was about 2.5 years old from my apartment when we were out by the place where I had the encounter with the owl.
Right.
So he was asleep in the bedroom. I had raised him and was a stay-at-home dad, spent every minute with him for the first 2.5 years of his life. He never, ever once fussed or had a nightmare. We did have 2 weird experiences where he ended up outside of his crib when we were in our living room when he was very small. And I would have thought he would have been harmed if he fell out of the crib. But like we found him twice outside of the crib laying on the floor when we were in the living room. And this experience happened. My son was over at my house. At that time, he said it was night and we were getting ready to go to bed. He said he wanted to look at the moon, so we went outside and we're looking at the moon. And then I went and put him in bed, and I was in the living room reading. He was asleep for a couple hours and then woke up screaming bloody murder. So I ran into the other room and picked him up and was calming him down. And he was terribly, terribly upset and said he wanted to go out and see the moon again. So when we were out seeing the moon the first time was when we saw the object. We were out there looking at the moon, and I saw a craft appear in the sky, and it was off in the distance, probably at the end of my street over a farm field that was beyond that. And it was up in the sky and was just blinking lights, and he had noticed it. And I didn't think anything of it. It was there in the sky, and I was watching it, and all of a sudden it dropped. Like it looked like it just fell to the ground. And we went inside, and I put him to bed. And then he wakes up terrified. We go back outside to look at the moon, and he says to me, he called himself in the third person at that time. He said, they took so-and-so up into the sky. And I said, who took so-and-so up in the sky? He says, the mean monster and the robot took me up into the sky. And I said, what happened? And he said, they touched my belly and there was blood. And then I said, what happened then? And he said quite calmly to me, they brought me back.
Yeah.
At age 2.5.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, I've been having these experiences all my life, and I was just like, I was thrown through the loop when that experience happened, because I was just like, it was just there. At that point, I was like, okay, there's no more doubting this when it's to the point where they're affecting my childhood, my child. They're coming and taking my kid, and immediately. At that time he was going to the doctor like every couple of weeks for blood work, and I took him to the doctor the next time within like 2 or 3 weeks from that event, and that was the last time he had any traces of the illness that he was born with.
There you go.
Yeah.
You see, quite often they look, from my own experience and other people that I've spoken to, going to the doctors may not be a comfortable experience. So
Sure.
Going on board a craft may not be a comfortable experience. But quite often, there's people are healed in that contact. Not always the first time. Or the opposite applies. That when they first get contacted, their immune system starts to fail. They are diagnosed with something like chronic fatigue syndrome and a lot of other immune issues. By qualified medical practitioners, and they can have that reversed, like Kathleen Marden did as well. She had her immune system problem reversed by the Zetas. One of the questions was by Susan Conlon: is this happening in generations of the two men's families?
The answer is yes. My family, my sister had multiple experiences that we discussed. My mother did at least one. My father, I think I did. My two brothers, no. My grandmother on my father's side did have experiences and gave my sister partial knowledge of what she might expect. She seemed to have been given some information that my sister needed to know, but was not passed down to me. So it seems like it came down through my father's side of the family, but not so. But my mother too. So. You know.
Yeah, generally it comes down through the female side of the family, but I'm pretty certain that that's correct, because we've spoken to a lot of people, and when we sort of do that generational lineage work with them, we're able to determine that it's generally come down through the mother.
The mother's side, yeah. It can skip a generation as well.
It can skip a generation.
Yeah.
A lot of things is some people refuse to acknowledge that it's happening their whole lives, and so they never speak about it to anybody.
Yeah.
And then so nobody ever knows whether it really did skip a generation as well. Also, the phenomenon itself, it exists with the races. And so just as you have consciousness around you, as you move through your time stream, so do these beings. And so as they move through your space, they affect the fabric and the energy of your reality. And so there'll be a lot of other phenomena taking place, such as maybe spirit contact, poltergeist activity, all these other things that are taking place as well.
And then you've got to try and work out what's what.
Yeah,
which could take a long time.
It's not clear, and there's not clarity in regards to what goes on. This is the big thing with it. And I tweeted yesterday, I said, just like a rabbit caught in the headlights, it's not that at all. It's what's behind it. And this is what everybody is at the moment. They're caught in the headlights. They're looking at the light, not understanding that it's not the light that you're supposed to be looking at. It's what's behind it that's going on. And if we could all just understand that it's not the phenomenon, that's just a byproduct of them. And they may not even be expecting us to understand that. But if we can understand that it's just us experiencing the phenomenon, then we can start to understand that it's what's really going on behind that that's important.
I want to make a comment on that in regards to a viewer had mentioned about do you think that they have a sense of humor? And I would have to say that whoever I'm in contact with definitely has a sense of humor, because when I was started having in 2015 and 2016, when I was having a lot of contact, that's when the paranormal got turned up. That's when all the strange things started happening in my house, and I was touched several times by something that I know touched me. And in the middle of the day, I'm standing there in my apartment, and something came up behind me. I psychically felt a presence, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder. And this happened more than once. This happened one morning when I woke up. I was laying in bed after I'd gotten up, and another situation was somebody had come and put their hand on me. I had a blanket over my knee, and they put their hand on my knee, and I felt the presence of them. And then I would have situations where objects would disappear from where they were supposed to be, and then reappear other places, and or just be gone for several days, and then reappear back where they went missing.
So that, Neil, that's called asports, an asport. And a port is when something's physically manifested from spirit realm, like a ring or something materializes on the table. But an asport is when it's moved from one part, like car keys or something, to the other. And spirit people do that a lot.
Thomas, we understand you have an engagement you have to pop off to, so we'll say bye to you now.
Okay.
And thank you.
I'll see you guys soon, okay?
Yeah,
Cheers.
Have a great evening, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.
Nice to meet you, Neil. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, when the thing about when we have a lot of extraterrestrial contacts going on around us, we maybe I have to remove Tom from the room. Hang on, let me see if I can do that.
Click.
Woo, there we go.
Done.
And now I can do this. There you go. Oh, I'm getting good at this. It increases the amount of spirit activity and other paranormal activity as well. So we spend a long time working with people trying to work out what is what. What is the extraterrestrial component of all their experiences going on around them. What are spirit people? What's actually being generated by the person themselves? They don't even realize. Our experience of working with the ETs, having them in the house fairly frequently, and because we can see them in the house, is that they're really not interested in anything earthly. They really are there for other reasons. Whereas the spirit people, they like to get our attention by moving objects around. If I was working with you and saying maybe what's going on, the feeling of the hand on the shoulder and feeling that presence behind you, I'd say that is if I had to form an opinion, is highly likely to be a spirit person trying to say hello to you and get your attention.
And that's what I was saying about the phenomenon itself that is generated by them actually causes you or spirit people the ability to interact with the living. That's the thing. And the more extraterrestrial phenomenon you have around you, the more spirit contact you have as well.
Yeah, it's really common. We see it all the time with people. The more their extraterrestrial contact increases, the more the spirit activity increases around them as well.
Yeah, I feel like at that time, like all my abilities got turned up at that time. It was like a jump I felt after I had a situation where I almost died in 2013, and was pretty sick for quite a while. I was in the hospital for several weeks and had to have emergency surgery, and everything got turned up at that point. And then when the activity in 2015 and 2016, where I was calling in a lot of ships and having visitations, that's when the other paranormal things started happening in the house. Shadow beings, the touching, the objects moving from places to place, or disappearing and then reappearing, or completely disappearing and just never coming back. And then we were seeing flashes of blue light at that time in the apartment, my son and I. Well, we would be in the living room, and there was a mirror that reflected the bedroom from the hallway. And in the bedroom where I slept is where these bright flashes of light would appear in the room.
Right. Somebody made a comment about the Anunnaki before, and it's really interesting because we've actually had contact with the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, Nancy says the Anunnaki did a number on us. You know what? Without the Anunnaki, there wouldn't be a human species.
Here we would be, yeah.
And yes, they have actually admitted that they created humans as a slave race. So as much as we don't like the Anunnaki.
That was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Not anymore.
If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't all be sitting here talking. That's all it comes down to. And this species of humans that currently exist here isn't the first species on this planet either. And humans are an introduced species, and they have been introduced multiple times to this planet. Okay. So yeah, that's a very interesting conversation in itself as well. All right, so
yeah, I think
Neil,
we've got all the questions.
We've done all the questions. We've had a chat with you.
Yeah.
We had a chat with Thomas, and I think that it's time for us to wrap up.
I think it is.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it was lovely to have everybody on today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Neil. Speak to you again.
I'll hand the golden mouse back to the controller. Go on.
I'm so
the
bad
technical
with
controller.
I'm much more comfortable banging rocks together around a fire.
Really? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for coming on. And thank you to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, what was I going to say? If you want more information about what we do, if you go to the show information, then our website address is there. There's lots more information about there, and the downloads for the books are there as well. Neil's information is in the show information in the same place, as is Thomas as well, if you want to have a little read about that. Okay, all right, let's do this thing. We will see you all in a week.
You're not going to play my funky intro, are you?
No, that's the intro.
What did you think of my intro with the phasing in of the three beings?
I like it.
No, who somebody asked what they look like. That's how they appeared to me on one occasion, so I drew that.
All right.
All right, we'll see you all in a week.
Yeah. Bye,
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.